Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. I'm GoLocal News Editor Kate Nagel. Thanks for joining us this Friday start to your afternoon. I want to thank Ray Rickman for taking the time to come in, and of course, Bob Whitcomb, GoLocal
Kate,
columnist.
How are you?
I appreciate, as always, you're taking the time
I've
to
been
come.
out sunbathing.
It is positively balmy here,
Absolutely,
compared to the beginning of the week. And lots to talk about, and I really want to maybe start internationally and then get really local here because GoLocal had the opportunity to be in Paris, France
I saw that.
last
I'm very
week.
alarmed. But obviously, the immigration controls are slipping over there.
To let us
Even
in.
without a shutdown. They don't have a shutdown. They still let you through.
So we got through, and the very first day that we were there, we did see over 80,000 of the yellow vests marching. Now, this had originally been sort of a labor issue, saying, why is this additional fuel tax, sort of anti-Macron?
Later retirements too. Macron wants them to retire later than age 11. So that's something.
A little outside the usual scope, and but you lived over there and you worked over there for a number of years.
I mean, people are sick of me referring to that occasionally in my column. They said, okay, so we knew you lived in France for a little while, forget it.
But so you really had that. I mean, we were there for a week. You were there for years.
Oh, there were great demonstrations when we were there, and sometimes it was sort of a form of recreation. It's usually in the spring when the weather's nice. And then often after the demonstration, people would repair to the nearest bar or fancy restaurant, or bistro, up on the left side of the Seine, Montparnasse. So very great sort of brasseries and everything. So people would be there defacing things, putting graffiti.
So you're just saying there's
breaking
a long
windows,
tradition,
tipping over cars, and then going over and having a very nice meal. So it's what struck me as unusual about this at the time of year. It's mostly in April, April in Paris. Cars
Oh, it was cold. It was cold.
And what, about 45 probably?
Well, not as cold as here, yes, but it was cool enough.
So I think, some of this ancient tradition going back to the French Revolution of demonstrations, and it's just, it's part of French culture. And a lot of people do it, enjoy it. This coalition of people who are demonstrating, it's a bizarre extreme right, or just bored.
Again, over 80,000. I mean, do you think Macron survives, and do you think that...
I do. I think he's a tough guy. He's a young guy, but I think he's very tough. He's unflappable, and I think he will survive, and I hope he does, because I think some of these market reforms have to be done if France is going to prosper in the long run. But he's pushing up against a lot of social resentments. There's a lot of, it's somewhat similar here, the resentment against the elites. In his case, the people who've gone to what they call the Grande École, which is roughly the equivalent of the elite colleges here, Stanford, the Ivy League, and Duke, and so on. And he is a product of that background. He comes from a prosperous background. He's not super rich, but prosperous, went to elite schools. And as in America, there's a lot of resentment against those people now, and they're also associated with, high finance and the Rothschilds, which brings in some anti-Semitism too. There's a little bit of there are a few strains of anti-Semitism and other bigotry in this, and certainly a lot of anti-immigrant animus because they blame the immigrants for high unemployment rate and for crime and so on. Sound vaguely familiar.
Well, we'll see. And I think last weekend was that 10th Saturday in the row, how long that'll have sort of the legs to continue. But wanted to get your thoughts because we had been over there. Let's get back to the U.S. and let's talk about travel. The TSA, the news this morning, major delays at LaGuardia.
Well, I heard they closed. Now, I could be outdated already, but I heard they actually closed LaGuardia incoming flights because of TSA staffing.
I'd only seen delays.
And if this is in the stock market, took this as a good sign because it'll put the Republican donors' pressure on Trump. Because, of course, New York's biggest industry is finance, so you're going to see a lot of investment bankers, hedge funders, and private equity people trying to get into LaGuardia so they can go over to their penthouse or downtown and do some work. And
you think this might be the...
I'm serious. The market went up after this was announced. And maybe 100 years ago it would have crashed, but now it went up because...
Thinking that there might be some light at the end of the tunnel.
Pressure point, Republican donors. Once they start closing airports in New York. Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about the State of the Union and the brouhaha between the president and
it's terrible.
the speaker.
I don't think it's going to be settled in the next few days. Obviously, it will be settled because of pressure in the Senate. I see some of the Republicans are now jumping ship. So, And I also heard this morning that Trump is preparing another emergency or trying to do the emergency thing, which would be another way of getting around this. My own view is what the Democrats should do: give him the wall, whatever, give him the wall in return for the dreamers, the kids who were brought here, without them knowing they were being brought here as kids, and the people, so-called DACA, and the people who came here to flee, the threat of death or torture in their home countries, the so-called temporary status, something or other. Let those people stay, regularize their status in America, let them stay, put them on a path of citizenship, and give them a stupid wall, which cannot be built at all, 2,000 miles of the border, because a lot of it's mountains anyway. So what Trump wants is a bunch of photo ops for the Make America Great Again crowd, for Sean Hannity and Ann Coulter and people like that. He basically wants photographs of big high walls going up in various places. So
it's interesting because a lot of folks have said from the Democratic side of the aisle saying, we're not going to negotiate with a hostage holder, saying that's the case. Yeah. But would you say that would then not be, that it would be then hence a fair trade, if you will?
I think looking at the welfare of the country, 5.7 billion ain't much. I noticed that Congressman Clymer, who's the number 3 ranked guy, the Democratic whip, suggested that, we'll spend 5.7 billion on border-related stuff, like ports of entry where the drugs come through. That very little trouble stuff comes over the so-called unpatrolled border. Most of it comes through the ports of entry and literally the ports on the ocean, or through these places like in San Diego and stuff where they come directly over the border and they have to go through these gates. That's where the drugs and the contraband come through.
So speaking
of, they want to boost protection.
The protection for there. Yeah. Speaking of trouble, in the response to the trouble of Roger Stone this morning and the
6
FBI,
o'clock in the morning in Fort Lauderdale.
Guns drawn, flak jackets on.
I'm still trying to figure out what Bob Mueller's theory was in doing that, because I'm sure that Stone, who is expected to be indicted for 2 years at least, he's even joked about it. He's pretty he's a total crook. He's been a crook his whole life, but he's pretty unflappable. Why they would do that? Why wouldn't the special prosecutor, special counsel, just say, appear with your lawyer in room 505, the office that the special investigation has taken over in Washington? Why don't they just tell him to show up?
Well, I guess I imagine that Roger Stone maybe could be perceived to be a flight risk, but I also don't understand why going to the door and just knocking on the door.
Where would he flee to? Russia? That might be a great thing for Mueller. If Stone fled to Russia, I think Stone would have the more standard thing in these white-collar crimes is to, and apparently they don't do perp walks anymore, or not as much, whatever. Even though it would have been fun to see me so natty, in this $5,000 suit. I think, again, the standard technique in this kind of thing, strategy, is just have them show up with your lawyer at the council's headquarters, present yourself, and then whatever, and then you talk about bail and all that stuff.
So we'll see what happens.
I don't understand why this publicity was done this way.
It was quite public.
Yeah,
we'll
6 in the morning. Usually right after the market closes, like 4:03 p.m.
I got them bright and early. Let's get very local here, and obviously what has been taking place and continues to take place with National Grid and the gas shutdown on Aquidneck Island. Your reaction when you first start to see this kind of snowball?
Well, I think a couple of things. I think things tend to be worse if your utility is not based in your region. In the old days, Narragansett Electric, which was the electric utility in Rhode Island, you had a problem, you'd call up the head of the company and they'd address it. It's much more difficult to get that kind of attention when the company is based in the UK, this big blob like Enterprise National Grid. The other thing, you're dealing with gas owned by a Canadian company, brought in through Canadian pipelines, and you don't have much control over them either. So I think the thing we should think about for the long run is this a good idea for us to depend on all this fossil fuel coming from far away when we have when we've got solar and wind energy, which is getting increasingly efficient, battery storage capability is rising, and it's local, or at least it's regional. Wouldn't it be better, looking ahead the next 10 years, 20 years, and it will take a while to make this transition, to get away from all this explosive gas? That's the other minor problem. It blows up and kills people. And oil being brought in by rapacious companies from far away.
Rapacious
companies far away who really don't care about you because they don't live where you live.
Well, I thought the apology by National Grid, which we had first asked, GoLocal did on the press call yesterday, it was sort of like, I'm sorry you feel that way. It was, you could tell.
Have a nice day.
Well, no, you can definitely tell that is going to be a bit of a lawyer-palooza between National Grid and Algonquin as to
they're duking it out about the valve, the famous valve.
Yes, who's going to be footing this bill. So
Two foreign companies.
National Grid's response is, we apologize anytime we can't provide service to you, which is basically saying we apologize for the problem that somebody else created. So it'll be very interested to see what ends up transpiring there.
But I think we do have to, I realize it's pie in the sky, but it really isn't, because technology is marching on. Wouldn't it be great if New England had its own power? Anyway.
We'll see moving forward. So I think we've covered some of the big national, international, and local
issues. The blackface. Florida,
yes. We will be reporting a little bit more about that moving forward as well, the latest there. But what else do you have for us in your column this
Well,
weekend?
I talk about that. I talk about the governor's school improvement plan on it, try to be more like Massachusetts. The only trouble with trying to be more like Massachusetts is Rhode Island actually is as poor as people think. It's richer than, on a per capita and household basis, richer than the majority of states, but it ain't as rich as Massachusetts. So when we say we're going to be like Massachusetts, Massachusetts has this amazing wealth creation complex in greater Boston. And I believe the last figure, Massachusetts is probably the richest state, the richest, the second richest state, so they can pay for a lot of this stuff. And it's going to take a hell of a long time for Rhode Island to restructure itself so it's as rich as Massachusetts. Now it's about 19th or 20th, I think, in per capita, Rhode Island is. And so when we talk about making the state as good as Massachusetts, which is a good ambition, obviously, because Massachusetts is a very well-run state and it's very successful, it's going to take a long transition.
So you're going to talk about education. Anything else to keep an eye
out
for?
I talk about a book, I can't remember the full name, by Stephanie Land, about being a maid. It's the life of a maid, and it's about the bigotry toward poor people. It's about the hard work. It's about fecklessness. She had a couple of kids out of wedlock, and I think that was very interesting. And there's some other...
And is it a good read?
I think so. I'm just starting on it. And I note the death of Russell Baker, who you probably don't remember, but I think his demise is a reminder of the loss of these sort of ruminative essayists that used to be in all the newspapers and a lot of the magazines. They weren't just talking about public policy issues or politics. They were talking about daily life, the irritations and joys of daily life.
But he was Masterpiece Theater.
Yeah, right. He had this wonderful voice. He was the American Alistair Cook. I mean, he had this kind of mellow Virginian voice, very courtly. But newspapers are so shrunken now, there's no space for that kind of thing anymore. The magazines used to have columns called The Easy Chair, for example. And it'd be just kind of watching life go by, talking about the weather in a sort of charming way, and about life's tragedies too, but taking in the long view of life's tragedies and
that is
joys.
Kind of no more.
It's gone. Yeah, it's
gone.
very sad. It's very sad.
Well, of course, tune in and read GoLocal this weekend to catch Bob Whitcomb's column. And we're going to sign off here now, but we're going to be popping up very shortly with Heather Henson, RISD grad and daughter of Jim Henson of Muppet fame, is going to be premiering a show here next week in Providence through FirstWorks, and we're going to have the opportunity to talk with Heather in just a moment. So we're going to sign off here now. We look forward to seeing you back here in the Navigant Credit